My adventures started in the summer of 1998. I was an intern for the Bureau of Land Management, and I hiked up into the mountains looking for mining tunnels. And those mining tunnels contained these common cave crickets, but they sort of freaked me out. And climbing into, I was there with my brother, and about 20% of my time was spent going into these tunnels, doing research on these locations. And we found a small prospect, and there was a hole in the ground, but we had to dig ourselves into it. And I slid under that hole, and straight above my face, about 3 or 4 inches, or about 5 or 6 of those. And years later, when I realized that the built environment was something that I wanted to get into, I started calling myself Tunnel Bug in homage to that. So does anybody know where this is? This is Hunter's Point. This is where they dismantled ships from Operation Crossroads, which were the ships that were contaminated with nuclear material. And they brought the ships back to San Francisco and took them apart here. And it's a highly radioactive site, but for some reason they seem to think it would make a good home site. So Lennar Corporation started building homes here. I'm not going to talk much about this location because I don't know much about it, and that's generally what happens when you go from place to place and you try to move around and photograph them. But I do know that it was an insane asylum at one time in the Northeast, and I may not give the location here. This location here was part of a fraud investigation. The man who bought this building received about $1.5 million from the local redevelopment authority. And it actually ended up being abandoned. But to get back to where I started these adventures, I came down to the Bay Area originally for college, and I took up a night job. My college night job was serving as security for the university. So it was essentially like being paid to explore. And I had a key to every building at Berkeley, which was nice. You know, I could go into Sather Tower anytime I wanted to. I could climb into the old steam tunnels. Nobody would yell at me. I looked somewhat official. But I came out of college, and I realized that there was this whole different world. Part of it started with a class that I took, Geography 160A, which was taught by Paul Groth. And he was the only professor in college who actually showed somewhat of some sort of emotion. And so when he was talking about the built environment, he was trained by J.B. Jackson, he's basically a savant of the built environment, landscape architecture. And when he was talking about his mentor, his former teacher, he broke down in tears. It was a telling moment for me, because somebody who had spent his life studying the built environment actually understood more about the human condition than any other professor I've known at Berkeley. So that's why I did this. I mean, I felt that buildings could be clues to culture and clues to a fingerprint to the human condition. And I started a lot of my journeys alone, but as you see here, later we ended up exploring places together. And that right there, the guy in the window, Scott Hafner, wave your hand please. And we developed more and more difficult ways to get into buildings. Nothing like John Law. Just hearing what he spoke about tonight humbles me. We discovered the reward in getting into places like this, because it took a lot of work, but I mean, look what you end up finding in the end. This is built in the Chicago School of Architecture, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places, but the city has done very little with it. And you see the same story across every city in the U.S. There's a building that's just neglected, and it contains so much historical and cultural value that we should put more value in them. What building is that? That's the Farwell building in Detroit. a lot of times I do things that generally don't tie directly into history, but they hold a story that I think could become history at some point in time. And this was before Michael Jackson had passed away. I was driving down the 101 and I found out that, or I was listening to these Christmas jingles on the radio, and I was tired of listening to Christmas music. So I thought, okay, I'm just gonna take a branch off to the side of the road, and I didn't have my tripod with me, but I bought one at a local hardware, or at a local photography store, and went to get a flashlight, and I walked into Neverland Ranch. One thing about this place was that it was extremely windy that night, and everything was moving except for these statues. Yeah. And what I've always thought, looking at all these statues, was that there was one person that Michael felt he was. He worked closely with his artists, and he would usually provide a level of guidance or control over what he wanted to be done. And I'll let you guys choose who you think Michael thought he was. But in general, this is, it repeated itself across the entire park. This was actually done with lighting assistance from Scott. He's actually, I think Steven, who's not here, he wasn't able to make it because the show was sold out. But he's inside the tent, lighting the inside. And this is from the outside, looking at the rides. I take a lot of these images with the 4x5 field camera. It allows me to get somewhat photos that show the truth of the architecture, because a lot of times you get distortion in the image, and it also allows you to get extremely high resolution images of places. You can see the resemblance to Disneyland in this shot. Michael Jackson did a lot of components of Neverland that directly tied in with Disneyland.
Was this a night shot?
Yeah, all of these are, not that one, but yeah. All of these were night shots. I don't want to confuse anybody. That's not Neverland Ranch right there. That's actually Oak Knoll Naval Hospital. This is where L. Ron Hubbard conceived of Dianetics, actually. And so it has an interesting story that most people wouldn't know just looking at the building, but I also like the beauty of the building, and it kind of shines through at night, and that's mostly because of the light pollution in the background from the city of Oakland. And this is the Woodward Avenue Presbyterian Church in Detroit. It was recently restored, so it's turned back into, I don't know if it's a church, but I was happy to hear that it's been restored. This was taken by Steven, who also was the same guy that was inside the tent at Neverland. This was the top of the Pacific Bell building, downtown San Francisco. And I mainly included that because it shows you what my camera looks like. It's a 4-pound field camera that resembles a lot of the older cameras, but it was actually made in 1980. And that was from a little further back. Yeah, so this is does anybody know what this is? Yeah, the SS Independence, which actually has a really sad story, because what happened about 2 years ago, Henry Dreyfuss designed the interiors here, one of the famous industrial designers of the time. The crystal chandelier inside the dining room. And this was probably my favorite shot of the whole. This is way down in the bowels of the ship, the engine room. And you can see it has a Hawaiian theme, because the ship actually sailed around Hawaii. And this is the sad ending. The ship was taken by Norwegian Cruise Lines. It was towed out to Alang, India. And it made me vow never to go on a cruise with Norwegian Cruise Lines again in my life. Because the way they dealt this was that they passed the ship off to a shell company, and the shell company gave it to another shell company, and that shell company moved it out into the middle of the ocean, took it to Dubai, and then from Dubai it went into Alang. India would not accept the ship because they're a bit more watchful of environmental protections these days. So they just let the ship sit out in the middle of the ocean, and at one point in time, the waves made it crack in half. So it's still sitting out there. This is the Sassoon Bay Naval Reserve Fleet. Some people may be familiar with it because it's been part of an environmental controversy recently. And the Obama administration has taken action, actually, and a lot of these ships are being towed out of the bay. That's bad news for people like us, but good news for the environment and good news for the Bay Area ecology. So an organization called Arc Ecology decided to take legal action against MARAD, and MARAD, which is an arm of the Department of Transportation, they were facing legal troubles. So the Obama administration responded by towing a lot of these ships out. So this is the USS Gettysburg, and it was an oil ship. I actually was volunteering in the park one day, and I met a man who actually served on the ship. And it was a complete coincidence, but he could tell me every detail of the inside of that ship. And that ship is now gone from the fleet. This is on the USS Sperry, which is a submarine tender, I believe. And one thing about these submarine tenders is you have a large crew on a submarine and you need to treat their teeth. So the submarine crew would come up and get their teeth treated on the Sperry. So this is the dental chair. I forget which ship this was. There are so many ships out there that you start to, they all start to blur. But this one we all know and we love it. It's the USS Iowa, and it should become a museum ship soon. Those are the large guns. There's multiple large guns on that ship. And this is another oiler. The oiler ships have a large maze of pipes that follow the deck of the ship. And a lot of them also have strange guns that shoot foam to put out oil fires. This is the brig. So the submarine tenders not only had a dentist, but they also had a prison for people that were acting up. And that's actually me inside prison. It's the first time that's happened while I've been exploring, actually. And this was done at the final night of our journeys. We went out over the course of a year, probably 5 or 6 times, 6 times maybe. This is the Vandenberg tracking station. Vandenberg is an Air Force base down in Southern California. And on the Air Force base is a Titan I missile silo. The Titan I missile silo actually exploded in 1960. And this is the smaller portion of the silo. This is actually the equipment terminal, which was about 4 levels. Behind me is the silo, which is in much worse shape. But there were dead animals inside of it. It looks like a toxic soup down there. I wouldn't want to be swimming there. And this is the pedestrian tunnel down into the same base, which was largely flooded because it had exploded at one point in time. A gantry for a Titan D missile silo. And the gantry basically held Titan D missile. The gantry held the missile, and it rolled it into place, and then it would remove itself and it would be launched. So Nikita Khrushchev, back in during the Cold War, wanted to go to Disneyland. He went down to LA and they wouldn't allow him to go into Disneyland. So he was very, very upset about that, and he was riding the train back up to San Francisco. And on the train ride back up, it passes through the Air Force Base. And Khrushchev didn't want to look at these missiles that were at the time pointed at Russia. So he turned his back to this grouping of missiles, and his advisor reported that the entire trip, all the way through the Vandenberg Air Force Base, he never looked at the base. And this is the console for the launch. Somebody kind of joked about the rotary telephone. You know, if you need to call for an emergency. Yeah. And this is what a Titan II looked like. There are multiple types of missile silos that the US developed. The major ones were the Titan IIs and the Titan Is. The Titan IIs were destroyed during the SALT Treaty. It was a strategic arms reduction, and the Soviets required the US, or the US agreed to, exploding these silos. So there are very few of these left in the US, and we were lucky enough to get to one of them out on Vandenberg. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about the book, and I'm going to try to move through this quickly, because I know how much everybody wants to buy our books. But this is about Grossinger's. This is the book that I've done for Ars Subterranea and Julia Solis, and both John and I have published books through Furnace Press, which is the publishing arm of Ars Subterranea. And what's pictured here is Selig Grossinger, who was the patriarch of the Grossinger Resort. This is in the lobby of the hotel. These are the keys of the hotel in the basement of the original home of the owners. You can see the logo from the hotel. This is what it looked like back in the days. You had a large crew of people who were dressed in clean whites. You had crystal everywhere, chandeliers. Everything was extremely splendid and made to look incredible. It was the height of being well known and revered back in the time. And these were the uniforms in the 1980s when the resort went through bankruptcy, and the dining room in a different day. At one point in time, it could seat 3,000 people, I believe. And down in the bottom, below the dining room, was this single scale. And I met a single man who knew everything about this resort. He knew every tiny detail. He told me that this scale was specifically purchased because they received a lot of produce, and the produce was, they were being tricked by weight. They would buy a certain amount of produce, and the produce was being given to them. So they bought a scale to remedy that problem. And that's what the resort looked like. They had 6 or 7 tennis courts, toboggan ride, multiple buildings, greenhouses, pools. And this was the main feature of the resort. It was the indoor pool. It won numerous architectural awards. It was done by a New Jersey architecture firm. This is what it looked like somewhat near its opening day in 1958. And this is the pool today. It's gone through its own hard times. There's a crack in the bottom of the pool, and that's somebody claims that's why it's empty, because otherwise it'd be full. In the winter, it gets especially cold, and you have icicles, which kind of add a nice artistic touch. And these are the Sputnik lamps. They're still there, surprisingly. I wanted to get a shot that looked like it was sitting in a lounge chair, so I tried to do it at the same angle as the lounge chairs. This is the outdoor pool, which was only one of 2 pools in the time that was built exactly to Olympic specifications. And that is the outdoor pool today. And in my research, I found a number of photos that showed people at the resort during its time. It's very hard to find older photos, but I was able to find a few. Those are the chairs down in the milkshake stand at the bottom, and those are the chairs today. We got really lucky, and we were able to go there when it was snowing, so again, a nice artistic touch with snow. In fact, there were a lot of tracks from animals walking through these snow fields. The greenhouse in its time. Basically, the greenhouse supplied the resort with its thousands of bouquets of arrangements for the dining room. So they had to continually grow flowers and different types of decorations for the dinners. And this is the ice skating rink, which was where they hosted the World Championship barrel jumping contests. And if you turn around and you look behind you, this is the inside of the ice skating rink today. So they still have the sign, which surprised me. And yeah. So keep an eye on those barrels. See if you can see number 13 and 13. This is the Jenny G building. In 1962, when this building was built, the patriarch's son-in-law, Harold Grossinger, who was the husband of Jenny Grossinger, their marriage had pretty much gone bad by then. They were living in separate rooms. A few days later, he went out to the front of the Joy Cottage, which was their home, and he passed away. Jenny was on a plane flying back, and I spoke with a number of people who were at some point involved in the Grossinger resort, including somebody who wrote a book about it, and he was in the plane when Jenny learned that her husband had passed away. But even then, she was pretty upset at the fact that he passed away. So they never really had a great relationship, but they somehow complemented each other. And that is the same building today. But this was built somewhat in homage to her. It was his present to her. And at least it's still standing, I suppose. And once you walk inside of the Jenny G, that's what you find. I mean, it's a mess. But this was top of the line sort of accommodations at the time. This is the terrace room, which was where all of the performances would be held. And they also had the champagne dance, which was when a lot of the guests would dance for a competition, and the guests would knock wooden knockers on the tables to vote for the best team. And the team that won a bottle of champagne. And that's the same vantage point today. And that's looking from the opposite side of the room. So the Catskills was a very large resort area at the time. There were 1,100 resorts, and today there are only about a dozen that operate. So it's pretty much a mecca of locations to shoot. And no matter where you drive, you'll always find an abandoned building. So this isn't Grossinger's, but it's one among dozens and dozens and dozens of other sites out there. In fact, I'd love to live out there for 6 years or so. And that's it. I mean, does anybody have any questions?
So all these places that just sat out there, did most of them go like bankrupt and then people just let them to decay? Like, are they in the middle of nowhere?
A lot of them are in the middle of the forest, and you could be walking through the forest sometime, and you would literally be walking over an old pool.
Yeah.
A lot of them are barely recognizable because they've either collapsed or they've been demolished. But sometimes you find ones that sort of lived a later life as a Hasidic accommodation, and they would go out there during the summer, but during the winter they would be pretty much abandoned. There are plenty of those, and it's very hard to really explore out there without knowing whether you're exploring an active site or an abandoned site, because they pretty much look the same in many cases.
But who owns them now, though? Somebody must still own that property.
A lot of people, this one in particular, not this one, but Grossinger's is owned by a public company, Capelli, and probably the worst run public company I know of, because they've completely allowed Grossinger's to fall into decline. I mean, it was that entire resort was the symbol of what the brand was, what Grossinger's was, and they're allowing it to fall apart. All they have on the site now are a couple golf courses, and that's what is left of it. They're planning on trying to do casinos out there, but it requires a lot of congressional wrangling and stuff. But yeah, it wouldn't be a happy ending for Grossinger's if it ends up being a casino.
What happened that there were all of these resorts and now nobody goes up there anymore? Did people start going to Florida or staying at home? Or?
There's a lot of theories. Some people say it was because the jet set era began and you could buy a flight to Mexico and fly there in 3 hours, in the same amount of time it takes you to drive to the Catskills, for about the same cost. And there's a lot to be said for that, but I think it also has a lot to do with changing culture and the loss of this insular society that Jews at one time were not allowed into any hotels. They were treated similar to blacks, and it wasn't until the Civil Rights Act that they were finally allowed to be integrated. And a lot of resorts still had signs that said no Jews allowed, well into the 50s and 60s. So these hotels were, in a way, they were a way to provide a place for Jews to socialize and spend time with their friends and family. In fact, everybody says that Grossingers, when they hear Grossingers, they think of Dirty Dancing, and Dirty Dancing in many ways was a lot of it told that sort of story. In fact, Grossingers was the inspiration for Dirty Dancing. The scriptwriter, Eleanor Bergstein, I believe, wrote her script after spending time at Grossinger's. In my book, I claim, I can't say definitively, but I can say that it played some sort of role in the creation of the State of Israel, because the first president of Israel spent about 3 months at Grossinger's. And there's a line in a book that I found that said that the desert will bloom like these daffodils in Grossinger's. So there's a couple really incredible stories about people and about nations, about governments and politics, and they all sort of converge in Grossinger's at the time. It was a place where people who had power and who had influence spent a lot of time. But it also had a lot of people in the lower rungs. And you see clues to that everywhere throughout the resort.
In the heart of the Borscht Belt, too? The entertainment circle? In the heart,
yeah, in Liberty, New York, which is, I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the area, but it's in Sullivan County.
How far from New York City?
2 hours.
2 hours, yeah.
So we saw, exploring bridges and ships and abandoned hotels. What do you think a guy like you would be exploring in 10 years from now?
This place.
Yeah, I don't think there will be much left. I mean, to hear John talk about his times in the late 70s and early 80s, I envy what he had at that time.
My time is now.
How many photos do you think you've taken over the years?
At one time I had about 25,000 images.
What's your favorite site?
My favorite site was probably Neverland. I think 30 years from now I'll look at it much in the same way that John looks at Golden Gate Bridge.
Did you go all the way up to the top of the zoo and the whole area?
We were everywhere that we could get into.
It was totally empty, no one was there?
There's a security guard. He didn't drive around though. He pretty much stayed in his little pillbox at the bottom of the hill. So getting out there at the time was really easy. You just had to walk on a cow pasture, and the worst that could happen to you would you'd step in cow pie.
What have you learned about the human condition from your exploration of the built environment?
Is that? I'm not sure how to answer that. I think as a culture, and I don't think anybody in this room is like that, but I think America as a culture treats things in a throwaway manner. And these photos, I hope, show that there are plenty of things that could be saved, but they're just being thrown into a dumpster somewhere. So maybe that's what the gist of, I'm not going to say it's the human condition, but I'm going to say it's the American condition. in many ways, it allows things to happen like this because of out of control, rampant sort of capitalism and mercantilism. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you very much for having your particular form of insanity.